I stood just outside the grand ballroom, my hand resting against the cold marble wall, listening to laughter that I had paid for but was never meant to belong to. Then I heard my daughter's voice, Claire. Soft, careless, cruel. "I wish she'd just disappear after tonight," she said. "She's embarrassing." I only invited her because I had to. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Because the wedding she was so proud of, every flower, every glass of champagne, had come from me. And she didn't even know. If you've ever loved someone more than they deserved, tell me where you're watching from and what you would do in my place. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Sometimes sharing a story like this is the only way we remind each other we're not alone. My name is Phyllis Bishop, and for most of my life I believed that love meant giving everything you had and then finding a way to give a little more. I spent 35 years working as a nurse at a public hospital in Cleveland. It wasn't glamorous work. There were no applause-filled moments or grand recognitions. Just long nights under fluorescent lights, aching feet, and the quiet responsibility of holding someone's hand when their world was falling apart. I saw people at their weakest, their most fragile, and I learned early on that love often shows up in the smallest, most invisible ways. I was 29 when my husband left. Claire was 5 years old at the time, still small enough to believe that every problem in the world could be fixed with a hug. I remember the night he packed his bags. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, just a quiet, hollow kind of finality. He said he needed a different life, and then he walked out the door like he was stepping into a brighter future, one that didn't include us. I didn't chase him. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not with a child watching me, so I did what I knew how to do. I went to work the next morning. I tied my hair back, put on my scrubs, and pretended my heart wasn't breaking in pieces behind my ribs. And when I came home that night, I made Claire dinner, helped her with her spelling words, and read her favorite bedtime story like nothing had changed. But everything had. From that point on, it was just the two of us. I worked double shifts whenever I could. Nights, weekends, holidays, it didn't matter. If there was an extra hour to earn, I took it. Not because I loved the work, but because I loved what it gave me the ability to say yes to Claire. Yes to school field trips. Yes to birthday parties. Yes to the little pink bicycle she begged for when she turned 7. I remember saving for months just to buy that bike. I skipped lunches at work, cut back on groceries, and told myself I wasn't really that hungry anyway. The day I brought it home, Claire ran down the driveway barefoot, her laughter ringing through the neighborhood like music. She threw her arms around me and said, "You're the best mom in the whole world." I held on to that moment longer than I probably should have, because back then I was. Claire was a sweet child, thoughtful, kind. The kind of girl who would draw pictures for the elderly neighbors and insist on helping me carry groceries even when the bags were too heavy for her small hands. She used to sit at the kitchen table while I paid bills, asking questions about everything: how money worked, why we had to save, what interest meant. I never lied to her. I told her the truth in the simplest way I could, that we didn't have as much as some people, but we had enough. That being careful didn't mean being poor, that dignity wasn't something you could buy. She would nod like she understood, and for a long time I believed she really did. I didn't date after my husband left. Not seriously, anyway. There were a few kind men over the years, co-workers, friends of friends, but I never let anything grow into something permanent. Every time I considered it, I would look at Claire and think about how fragile her world already was. I didn't want to risk bringing someone into our lives who might leave again. So I chose her. Every time. I missed out on things. I know that now. There were weddings I didn't attend, trips I didn't take, moments I quietly stepped away from because they didn't fit into the life I had built around being a mother. But at the time, it didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like purpose. As Claire grew older, I started putting money aside for her future. Not a lot at first, just small amounts whenever I could manage it. $10 here, $20 there. It didn't seem like much, but over time it added up. I opened a savings account in her name and promised myself that one day it would help her build a life bigger than anything I could give her on my own. College, stability, opportunity. Everything I never had. When she got into the University of Michigan, I cried harder than I had in years. Not out of sadness, but pride. She had worked so hard. Late nights studying, balancing part-time jobs, pushing herself in ways I never had to ask her to. The day we moved her into her dorm, I remember standing in the doorway watching her arrange her books on the shelf, her posters on the wall. She looked so grown up, so ready. "You're going to do amazing things," I told her. She smiled, but there was something different in her eyes, a kind of distance I couldn't quite name at the time. "Thanks, Mom," she said, already turning back to her new life. I told myself it was normal, that this was what independence looked like, and maybe in some ways it was. But that was also the moment something began to shift quietly, almost invisibly between us. At first it was small things. She stopped calling every night, then every week. When we did talk, the conversations felt shorter, more rushed. She would mention new friends, new places, new experiences that sounded different from anything she had known growing up. Fancier, more polished. I tried to keep up. I really did. I asked questions, showed interest, listened carefully, but sometimes I felt like I was hearing about a world that didn't quite have room for me in it. Still, I held on to hope, because love, I believed, was patient. And no matter how far Claire went, no matter how much her life changed, I thought she would always remember where she came from. I just didn't realize how much she would want to forget. The first time I realized Claire was changing, it wasn't something she said. It was something she didn't. She had been at the University of Michigan for about 3 months when I drove up to visit her. I packed a small cooler with homemade food, her favorite chicken casserole, fresh rolls, even the lemon bars she used to beg me to make on weekends. It felt like something a mother should do. Something normal. I didn't tell her I was coming until I was already halfway there. I thought it would be a nice surprise. When I called her from the parking lot outside her dorm, there was a pause on the other end of the line, just a second or two, but I felt it. "Oh, you're here," she said. Her voice didn't sound excited. It sounded caught off guard. "I brought you some food," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Thought you might miss home cooking." Another pause. "Yeah. I mean, that's nice, Mom. I have people over right now." I looked up at the building at the windows reflecting the gray afternoon sky. "That's okay. I can just drop it off. I won't stay long." She hesitated again, and this time I knew something wasn't right. "Can you wait 15 minutes, she asked. "I'll come down." That should have been my first clue. Claire had never asked me to wait before, but I said yes. I sat in my car, hands folded in my lap, watching groups of students pass by. They laughed loudly, dressed in clothes that looked expensive, even from a distance. Tailored coats, sleek boots, bags with brand names I had only ever seen in magazines. When Claire finally came out, she wasn't alone. There were 3 girls with her, all of them polished in a way I couldn't quite explain. Their hair looked professionally styled, their makeup flawless, their confidence effortless. They glanced at my car, then at me, their expressions shifting into polite curiosity. Claire didn't introduce me right away. She walked over, took the cooler from my hands quickly and smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give a stranger. Tight. Controlled. "Thanks, Mom," she said. "You really didn't have to do this." I tried to laugh. "Of course I did. You barely know how to cook." One of the girls behind her let out a soft chuckle. Claire's smile tightened. "I actually cook all the time now," she said a little too quickly. "Things are different here." I nodded, pretending I didn't notice the shift. "That's good," I said gently. "I'm glad you're taking care of yourself." There was a moment where I expected her to say something more, to hug me maybe, to introduce me properly, but instead she glanced back at her friends, then lowered her voice. "I should get back," she said. "We're kind of in the middle of something." "Right," I replied. "Of course." I lingered for just a second too long, waiting for something that didn't come. "Drive safe, okay?" she added, already turning away. And just like that, she walked back toward the building, her friends closing around her like I had never been part of the picture. I sat in my car for a long time after that, long enough for the sky to darken and the campus lights to flicker on. I told myself it was nothing, that she was just adjusting, that college changed people, and that didn't mean she loved me any less. But deep down, something inside me had shifted too. After that visit, the distance between us became harder to ignore. Claire's calls grew shorter, then less frequent. When I asked about her classes, she gave vague answers. When I asked about her friends, she mentioned names but never details. And slowly, almost without realizing it, she stopped asking about me altogether. One evening a few weeks later, I called her after my shift. It had been a long day. One of my patients had passed away, a woman not much older than me with no family by her side. I had sat with her in her final moments, holding her hand, whispering that she wasn't alone, even though in truth she was. I needed to hear my daughter's voice. When Claire answered, I could hear music in the background. Laughter. The clink of glasses. "Hey, Mom," she said, distracted. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied softly. "Are you busy?" "A little. I'm at a friend's place." I hesitated, then said I just had a rough day. Thought I'd check in. There was a pause. Not the kind that feels comforting. The kind that feels like an inconvenience. "Oh," she said. "What happened?" I explained briefly. About the patient. About how it felt. Claire didn't say much. "That's sad," she said after a moment. "But, that's kind of your job, right?" Her words weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Yes, it is." "Look, I don't want to be rude," she added, "but it's kind of loud here. Can I call you later?" "Of course," I said quickly. "Don't worry about it." She never called back. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over again. It wasn't just what she said. It was how easily she said it. Like the emotional weight of my world no longer mattered to her. Like I had become background noise. Over the next year, the changes became more obvious. Claire started posting photos, online pictures I wasn't part of. Elegant dinners, rooftop parties, weekend trips. She wore dresses that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She stood beside people who looked like they had never worried about money a day in their lives. In those photos, she looked happy, confident, perfect. But there was something else too, something missing. I didn't recognize the girl in those pictures, not completely. One afternoon, I called her after seeing a post from a charity gala she had attended. She looked stunning, hair styled in soft waves, wearing a black dress that fit her like it had been made just for her. "You looked beautiful," I told her when she answered. "Thanks," she said. It was a nice event, What kind of event was it? Just networking, fundraising stuff. I smiled even though she couldn't see me. I'm proud of you, you know. You've come so far. There was silence on the other end. Then she said, Mom, you don't have to say things like that. My chest tightened. Like what? Like you understand this world. It's just different from what you're used to. I blinked, caught off guard. I didn't mean I know, she interrupted gently but firmly. I just don't want things to feel awkward. Awkward. That was the word she chose. Not distant. Not complicated. Awkward. I forced a small laugh. I'm sorry if I made you feel that way. It's fine, she said quickly. I just have to go. Talk later. Okay? Okay, I whispered. But as the line went dead, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. Claire wasn't just growing up. She was pulling away, and for the first time in her life, she was doing it on purpose. The first time I met Ethan Caldwell, I remember thinking how carefully everything about him seemed arranged. Not just his appearance, though, that alone would have been enough to notice. His suit was tailored in a way that suggested money, not just style. His watch gleamed subtly under the restaurant lighting, expensive without being loud about it. Even his smile felt practiced, like something he had perfected over years of knowing exactly how to present himself. But it wasn't just him, it was everything around him. Claire had chosen a restaurant in downtown Cleveland I had only ever walked past. The kind of place with soft lighting, white tablecloths, and menus without prices printed next to the dishes. I hesitated for a moment before walking in, smoothing down my blouse, suddenly aware of how simple I must have looked compared to everyone else inside. Claire stood when she saw me. Mom, she said, her voice bright but controlled. You made it. She hugged me quickly, too quickly, and then stepped back. This is Ethan. He extended his hand, his grip firm but not overly so. Mrs. Bishop, I've heard a lot about you. I smiled politely. Please call me Phyllis. Phyllis, he repeated as if testing the name. His eyes flickered over me, not rudely but carefully. Assessing, measuring. Something about it made me straighten my posture just a little. Dinner was pleasant in the way conversations often are when everyone is trying to maintain a certain image. Ethan spoke confidently about his work in investment consulting, though he never went into too much detail. Claire listened to him with an attentiveness I hadn't seen from her in years. She laughed at his jokes, leaned in when he spoke, touched his arm lightly like they were already a perfectly synchronized pair. I watched them, a quiet knot forming in my chest, not because I didn't like him, but because I didn't know him. And somehow Claire seemed to belong in his world more than I did. As the meal went on, Ethan began asking me questions. Where I worked, how long I'd been a nurse, what kind of patients I saw. I answered honestly. I've been at the same hospital for over 3 decades, I said. Mostly long-term care and critical cases. That must be intense, he replied, nodding thoughtfully. It can be, I admitted, but it's meaningful. He smiled again, but this time there was something behind it I couldn't quite name. Of course, meaningful. Claire shifted slightly in her seat. I noticed. After that, the conversation drifted back toward safer topics, travel events, mutual acquaintances Claire had made. People I had never met, stories I couldn't fully follow. And slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, I became the quietest person at the table. When dinner ended, Ethan insisted on paying. I offered out of habit, but he waved it off immediately. Please, he said. It's my pleasure. Claire smiled at him in a way that made something inside me ache. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool, the city lights reflecting off the pavement. Claire stood close to Ethan, her arm looped through his like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm glad you finally met," she said, looking between us. "Me too," I replied. And I meant it. But as I watched them walk toward his car, a sleek black vehicle that probably cost more than I made in a year, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into a story that had already been written without me. It wasn't long after that dinner that Claire called me with the news. "He proposed," she said. Her voice was bright, excited, almost breathless. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table, my heart swelling with emotion. "Claire, that's wonderful." I said yes, obviously, she added with a small laugh. "Of course you did." I tried to picture it. The proposal, the moment, the life she was stepping into. "I want you to meet his parents," she continued. "They're hosting a dinner next weekend." Something in her tone made me pause. Not hesitation. Not exactly, but expectation. "All right," I said. "I'd like that." The Caldwell home was impressive. There's no other word for it. A large house on the outskirts of the city, set back from the road with a long driveway and perfectly manicured lawn. The kind of place that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread, not real life. I parked my car near the end of the drive, suddenly very aware of how modest it seemed compared to the luxury vehicles already there. When I rang the doorbell, it was opened by a woman who carried herself like she had never once doubted her place in the world. "Phyllis," she said, her voice smooth, practiced. "I'm Victoria Caldwell." Her eyes moved over me in a single sweeping glance. Polite, but unmistakably evaluative. "It's nice to meet you," I replied. She stepped aside, allowing me in. The interior of the house was just as immaculate as the exterior. High ceilings, polished floors, artwork that looked expensive even to someone like me who knew nothing about art. Richard Caldwell stood near the fireplace, a glass of something amber in his hand. "Welcome," he said, his tone neutral. "We've heard a great deal about you." Again those words. Heard a great deal. But I couldn't help wondering what exactly they had heard. Dinner was formal, carefully structured, and from the very beginning I could feel it, the subtle undercurrent of something unspoken. Victoria asked questions, but not in the way Ethan had. Hers were sharper, more precise. "What line of work are you in?" "Phyllis," she asked, though I suspected she already knew. "I'm a nurse," I replied. She nodded slowly. "How admirable." The word lingered in the air, wrapped in something that didn't quite feel like praise. "And you've been doing that your entire career?" "Yes. I imagine it requires a certain resilience." I smiled politely. "It does." There was a brief silence. Then she said almost casually, "Claire has adjusted remarkably well to our social circle. We do attend quite a few events, charity functions, formal gatherings. It can be overwhelming for some." I understood what she was implying. Claire shifted beside Ethan, her posture stiff. "I've always believed that people can adapt," I said gently. Victoria's lips curved into a small smile. "Yes, some more easily than others." The conversation moved on, but the message had already been delivered. I wasn't part of their world, and they didn't expect me to be. Later that evening, as I stood near the window watching the lights stretch across the lawn, Claire approached me. "Mom," she said quietly, "just try to be comfortable." "Okay," I turned to look at her. "I am comfortable," I said. She hesitated. I just mean, don't overthink things. They're very particular about impressions. Impressions. I nodded slowly. I understand. But as I drove home that night, the silence in my car felt heavier than usual. Because for the first time, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. It wasn't just that I didn't belong in their world, it was that they didn't want me to. And somewhere along the way, Claire had started to agree with them. If there's one thing I've learned after a lifetime of watching people really watching them, it's this: true intentions rarely announce themselves loudly. They slip in through small comments, casual suggestions, polite smiles that don't quite reach the eyes. That's how the wedding conversation began. It wasn't framed as a demand, it was presented as an opportunity. We were sitting in Victoria Caldwell's living room a few weeks after the engagement, sipping tea from delicate porcelain cups that felt too fragile in my hands. Claire sat beside Ethan on the velvet sofa, her posture perfect, her smile eager. Victoria leaned forward slightly, her expression warm in a way that felt carefully constructed. "We've been discussing the wedding," she said, glancing briefly at Richard before turning her attention back to Claire. "And we think it should reflect the kind of life you're stepping into." Claire's eyes lit up. "Of course." "There's a venue in Napa Valley," Victoria continued. "Absolutely stunning. Vineyards, panoramic views, impeccable service. It's the sort of place that creates unforgettable impressions." I stayed quiet, listening. Richard cleared his throat. "Naturally, such a setting comes with certain expectations. Guest experience, accommodations, catering, it's not something one approaches casually." Claire nodded quickly. "I understand." Victoria's gaze shifted ever so subtly toward me, and of course, she added, "these things are often a collaboration between families." There it was. Not a request, not a statement, just a carefully placed suggestion hanging in the air. Claire looked at me, then her expression hopeful, almost pleading. "Mom, I don't want anything over the top, but I do want it to be beautiful. Beautiful." I smiled softly. "Every bride deserves that." Ethan reached over, squeezing Claire's hand. "We just want it to feel right. Something that reflects both families." Both families. The words echoed in my mind, but the reality felt very different. Over the next few weeks, the plans grew bigger. The venue was booked. Napa Valley, just like Victoria had suggested. The guest list expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. Business associates, social connections, distant acquaintances who somehow held importance in this carefully curated world. Claire sent me photos of floral arrangements, table settings, designer gowns, each one more extravagant than the last. "This is what everyone's doing now," she said during one of our calls. "It's not about showing off. It's about creating an experience." I listened. I nodded. I told her everything looked beautiful, but I also knew what she wasn't saying. She wanted to belong, and this wedding was her way in. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and a calculator. Numbers had always made sense to me. They were honest, predictable. They didn't hide behind polite smiles or social expectations. But the numbers I was looking at now didn't feel honest. They felt overwhelming. Venue deposit, catering, travel arrangements, decor, dress. Every line I wrote down added weight to a truth I was trying not to face. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a performance. And performances come at a cost. A few days later, Claire called me, her voice unusually quiet. "Mom, can we talk?" I could hear something in her tone, something fragile. "Of course," I said immediately. There was a pause. Then she said, Victoria mentioned that traditionally, the bride's family contributes significantly to the wedding. I closed my eyes for a moment. I see. I'm not asking you to do anything you can't, she added quickly. I don't want to feel like I'm coming into this with less. Everyone already assumes things based on appearances. Appearances. That word again. I understand, I said gently. And I did. More than she realized. I just want it to be perfect, she whispered. Perfect. I looked around my small kitchen, the worn cabinets, the familiar table, the life I had built piece by piece over decades. There was nothing perfect about it, but it had been real. Let me think about it, I told her. That night I didn't sleep. I walked from room to room, my mind turning over possibilities, each one more difficult than the last. By morning I had made my decision. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was inevitable. A week later, I met with a real estate agent. My house wasn't large, but it had been mine. Every corner held a memory. Claire's height marked on the kitchen wall, the backyard where she learned to ride her bike, the bedroom where I had sat beside her during fevers and nightmares. Selling it felt like erasing a part of my life. But I told myself something I had believed for years, that love sometimes requires letting go. The process moved quickly, faster than I expected. Within a month, the papers were signed. The house was no longer mine. I moved into a small apartment across town. Temporary, I told myself. Just until everything settled. The money from the sale combined with my savings was more than enough. More than enough to make Claire's wedding everything she wanted it to be. But I didn't tell her. Instead, I contacted the wedding planner directly, a woman named Elise who spoke in calm, efficient tones and seemed to understand exactly how these kinds of events worked. I'd like to handle the payments, I told her. All of them? Yes. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. That's very generous, she said carefully. I have one condition, I added. Of course. I want it to remain confidential. The Caldwell family can take credit. Claire doesn't need to know. Silence. Then softly, are you sure? I thought about it for a moment. About Claire's voice when she said she wanted things to be perfect. About the way she looked at Ethan. About the life she was trying so hard to step into. Yes, I said. I'm sure. From that point on, everything moved seamlessly. Invoices were sent to me. Payments were processed quietly. The wedding grew more extravagant by the day. And publicly, it appeared as though the Caldwell family was orchestrating it all. Victoria never questioned it. In fact, she seemed to take quiet pride in the scale of it. I always believed in doing things properly, she said during one of our meetings. Half measures only lead to disappointment. I smiled politely. If only she knew. Claire, meanwhile, seemed happier than I had seen her in years. She called more often, shared details, asked for opinions, though I noticed she often already knew what she wanted. Still, I cherished those moments, because for brief periods of time it felt like we were close again, like the distance had faded, like everything I had done was worth it. But even then there was something beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite ignore, because every time Claire spoke about the wedding, she spoke about the Caldwell family, their contributions, their vision, their generosity. And I realized something slowly and painfully in the story she was telling herself. I didn't exist. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. And yet I continued, because I told myself one final thing, that when the day came, when she stood there surrounded by everything she had dreamed of, maybe she would look at me, really look at me, and remember. Who had made it all possible? The strange thing about being quietly erased is that it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers. At first, you don't even notice. Then one day you realize you're no longer part of the picture. You're just standing somewhere outside the frame watching. That's how the wedding planning unfolded for me. At the beginning, Claire included me in small ways. She would send photos of dresses, ask which one I liked better, call to describe floral arrangements or table settings. Her voice would carry a kind of excitement I hadn't heard in years, and for a while I let myself believe we were rebuilding something. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. The calls became less frequent. The decisions were already made before I heard about them, and eventually, I stopped being asked altogether. One afternoon, I found out Claire had chosen her wedding dress through a social media post. It was a beautiful gown, sleek, elegant, with delicate lace detailing along the sleeves. She stood in front of a full-length mirror, smiling, surrounded by Victoria and two other women I didn't recognize. The caption read, "Saying yes to the dress with the most important people." I stared at the photo longer than I should have. My reflection flickered faintly on the screen of my phone, small, distant, almost ghost-like. Not one of the most important people. Not even mentioned. I told myself it was nothing, that she must have been busy, that things had moved quickly, but the truth settled quietly in my chest. I hadn't been invited. A few days later, Claire called. "Hey, Mom," she said casually. "Things have been a little crazy lately." I saw the dress, I replied, keeping my voice steady. "It's beautiful." "Oh yeah," she said quickly. "It was kind of last minute. Victoria had a connection and we just went for it." "I understand," I said. And I did. Understanding had become something I was very good at. "I'll send you more pictures later," she added. But she didn't. Moments like that became more frequent. The cake tasting, the venue walkthrough, the final guest list. Each time I learned about it after the fact, or not at all. Victoria had taken control of the process with quiet efficiency. Every decision flowed through her. Every detail reflected her taste, her standards, her version of what the wedding should be. And Claire followed. I saw it clearly even when Claire couldn't. She wasn't just planning a wedding, she was trying to become someone else. One evening I received an email from Elise, the wedding planner, a finalized seating chart. I opened the attachment, scanning the names, the tables, the careful arrangement of guests according to status and connection. The Caldwell family occupied the front table's center stage, close to the bride and groom. Business associates, influential friends, extended relatives, they all had places that reflected their importance. I searched for my name. It took longer than I expected to find it. Table 19. Near the back of the room, next to a group of distant acquaintances I had never met. For a moment I thought it had to be a mistake. I read it again, then again, but the name didn't move. It stayed exactly where it had been placed. Out of sight, out of focus, out of importance. I sat there at my small apartment table, the glow of my laptop casting a pale light across the room, and felt something inside me shift. Not break. Not yet. Just shift. I closed the file and stared at the wall in front of me. This was the part no one talks about. Not the big betrayals, not the dramatic confrontations, but the quiet moments where you realize your place in someone's life has changed and no one thought it was important enough to tell you. I could have said something. I could have called Claire, asked her why I wasn't sitting closer, why I hadn't been included in the decisions, why I felt like a guest instead of a mother. But I didn't, because I already knew the answer, and sometimes hearing the truth out loud only makes it harder to carry. A week before the wedding, Claire invited me to a small pre-wedding dinner. "Just close family," she said. I almost laughed at the phrasing. Close family. Still, I went. The dinner was held at an upscale restaurant, another one of Victoria's choices, no doubt. The lighting was soft, the atmosphere intimate, the kind of setting designed to make everything feel more meaningful than it actually was. When I arrived, most of the guests were already there. Victoria greeted me with her usual composed smile. "Phyllis," she said. "So glad you could make it." I nodded politely. "Thank you for inviting me." She gestured toward the table. "We're just getting started." I took my seat, noticing immediately how the arrangement mirrored everything else. The Caldwells at the center, Claire beside Ethan, and me, just slightly off to the side, close enough to be included, far enough to be overlooked. Dinner progressed smoothly. Conversation flowed around me. Business deals, social events, travel plans. Topics I couldn't fully contribute to even if I had wanted to. Claire laughed easily, leaning into Ethan, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. I watched her trying to find the little girl she used to be, but she felt distant, like someone I had once known rather than someone I still did. At one point, Victoria raised her glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, her voice carrying just enough to quiet the table. Everyone turned their attention to her. "To family," she continued. "To new beginnings, and to the joining of two lives and two legacies." There was a murmur of agreement. To Claire and Ethan, she added, "May their future be as bright and successful as the foundation we've helped them build." Glasses lifted. Voices echoed the sentiment. I raised mine too, but as I took a sip, the words lingered in my mind. The foundation we've helped them build. We. I set my glass down carefully, the weight of everything pressing in just a little more. Claire glanced at me briefly, offering a small smile, and for a second I thought she might say something. Acknowledge me. Include me. But she didn't. The moment passed as quickly as it had come, and the conversation moved on. Later that night, as I drove back to my apartment, the city lights blurred through my windshield. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, not out of anger, not even out of sadness, but out of something deeper, a quiet understanding that had been building for months. I had given everything, my time, my energy, my home, my savings, my life, and in return, I had become invisible. Still, I told myself one last thing, just one, that when the wedding day came, maybe Claire would see me, not as an obligation, not as an afterthought, but as her mother, and that would be enough. I didn't know yet how wrong I was. The morning of the wedding arrived wrapped in a kind of quiet beauty that almost felt unreal. Napa Valley stretched out beneath a pale blue sky, the vineyards rolling endlessly in soft green waves. Everything looked perfect, like something carefully painted, touched up, and framed for display. Even the air felt different there, cleaner, lighter, as if nothing heavy or painful could possibly exist in a place like that. But I carried my weight with me. I woke up early in my small hotel room long before the rest of the guests stirred. For a few moments, I simply sat on the edge of the bed, my hands folded in my lap, listening to the silence. It should have been a joyful morning, my daughter's wedding day. The kind of day a mother imagines for years, picturing the dress, the ceremony, the moment her child steps into a new chapter of life. And yet, as I looked at my reflection in the mirror across the room, I didn't see excitement. I saw distance. I had chosen a simple dress for the occasion. Soft blue, modest, elegant in a way that didn't try too hard. I had spent more time than I cared to admit deciding on it standing in front of dressing room mirrors weeks earlier, wondering what would look appropriate in a world that never quite felt like mine. In the end, I chose something that felt like me, even if no one else noticed. I arrived at the venue early. Part of me wanted to be helpful, to offer assistance, to feel like I had a role beyond simply showing up. Old habits are hard to break. The venue itself was breathtaking. Rows of white chairs lined the ceremony space, perfectly arranged to face a floral arch that looked like it had been pulled straight from a dream. Roses, peonies, greenery, all woven together with effortless precision. Staff members moved quietly in the background, adjusting details, ensuring everything was exactly as it should be. Everything I had paid for. And yet, as I stood there watching it all come together, I felt like a visitor, not a contributor, not a mother, just someone who happened to be there. Phyllis. I turned at the sound of my name. Victoria approached, her heels clicking softly against the stone path. She looked immaculate as always. Her dress was tailored perfectly, her hair styled in elegant waves, her posture straight and assured. "You're early," she said, offering a polite smile. "I thought I might be able to help," I replied. She glanced around briefly, then back at me. "Oh, everything is already under control," she said smoothly. "But thank you." "Of course." Everything was always under control. "I see," I said, nodding. She tilted her head slightly. "You can take your seat when guests begin arriving. It's important we keep the flow organized." I almost smiled at the phrasing. Keep the flow organized, as if I might disrupt something simply by existing. "I understand," I said quietly. She gave a small nod and moved on, already turning her attention to something or someone else. I stood there for a moment longer before stepping away. There was nothing for me to do, and nowhere I was truly needed. Guests began arriving shortly after, men in tailored suits, women in elegant dresses. Conversations filled the air, light and effortless, punctuated by laughter that seemed to echo across the vineyard. I found my seat at table 19 during the reception setup, just as the seating chart had promised. From there, the view was distant. The ceremony itself unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance. Music began softly, signaling the start. Ethan stood at the front, composed and confident, his expression steady as he waited. The officiant spoke in warm, measured tones about love, commitment, and the merging of two lives. And then Claire appeared. For a moment, everything else faded. She looked beautiful, radiant in a way that felt almost unreal. Her dress flowing behind her as she walked down the aisle. Her smile was soft, controlled, but undeniably present. My chest tightened. Because no matter what had changed between us, that was still my daughter. The little girl who once ran barefoot down our driveway. The one who used to hold my hand like she never wanted to let go. I felt tears gather in my eyes, blurring the edges of the moment. I blinked them away quickly. This wasn't a day for sadness. At least, it wasn't supposed to be. Claire reached the front, her eyes meeting Ethan's. They exchanged a look that spoke of certainty, of belonging, of a shared future that I could only observe from a distance. The vows were spoken, promises made, words that carried weight even if they were rehearsed. When they said "I do," the guests erupted into applause. I clapped too, because that's what you do, even when your heart feels like it's quietly breaking in the background. The reception that followed was even more elaborate. Tables adorned with intricate centerpieces, crystal glasses catching the light, a band playing softly in the corner, their music blending seamlessly with the hum of conversation. Everything moved exactly as planned, exactly as designed. The speeches began. Richard spoke first, his tone measured, his words carefully, chosen to highlight family legacy success and the bright future ahead. Victoria followed, her voice warm and composed as she spoke about welcoming Claire into their family, about the importance of unity, about the strength of the foundation they had helped create. Again that word, foundation. I sat quietly listening, waiting. Not for recognition. I had stopped expecting that. But perhaps for something. A glance. A mention, a simple acknowledgement. It didn't come. Claire stood next to her glass, trembling slightly in her hand. She spoke about love, about Ethan, about the life they were building together. Her voice softened as she thanked the Caldwell family, their support, their generosity, their role in making the day possible. I felt something inside me go still. Completely still, because in that moment, I understood. This wasn't an oversight. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was a choice, a deliberate, quiet decision to rewrite the story in a way that didn't include me. The applause came again, louder this time, and I joined in, my hands moving automatically even as my mind drifted somewhere far away. After the speeches, the music picked up. Guests filled the dance floor, laughter rising as the evening continued. I remained at my table for a while, watching, observing, trying to hold on to something that felt like meaning. But all I felt was distance. Eventually, I stood. Not because anyone asked me to, not because I had somewhere specific to go, but because I needed air. I stepped away from the reception area, moving quietly along the edge of the venue, past the lights and the music and the carefully curated perfection of it all, out into the open space beyond. The night air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of vineyards and distant earth. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs, trying to steady myself, trying to make sense of everything I was feeling. And that's when I heard it. Claire's voice. Just beyond the corner of the building, soft, unaware, and everything inside me stilled, because I knew somehow before I even heard the words that whatever came next would change everything. I didn't mean to listen. That's the part I've gone over in my mind more times than I can count. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't searching for answers. I had simply stepped outside for a moment of quiet, for a breath of air that didn't feel staged or measured or carefully arranged. But the moment I heard Claire's voice, something in me froze. Instinct, maybe. Or something deeper. Something that knew even before I understood why that this was a moment I couldn't walk away from. "I just need a minute," she was saying. Her voice was softer than it had been inside, stripped of the polished warmth she used in front of guests. There was something else there now. Tension. Irritation. Another voice followed, Lily Carter. I recognized it from earlier introductions. "You've been smiling nonstop for hours," Lily said lightly. "You're allowed to breathe, you know." Claire let out a small laugh, but it didn't sound genuine. I know, it's just a lot. I stood perfectly still just beyond the edge of the stone wall, my hand resting lightly against it, as if it were the only thing keeping me grounded. "It looks perfect from out there," Lily continued. "Honestly, people are obsessed. Victoria's been bragging all night." "Of course she has," Claire muttered. There was a pause. Then Lily said, quieter now, "So what's wrong?" Silence stretched between them, and in that silence I felt something shift inside me. Because I knew that whatever Claire was about to say, she had never said to me. Claire exhaled slowly. "I wish tonight could just be Cleaner. Cleaner, Lily echoed. You know what I mean. I actually don't. Another pause. Longer this time. And then I wish she'd just disappear after tonight. The words didn't hit me all at once. They didn't explode or shatter or echo dramatically in my mind. They settled. Slowly, quietly, like something heavy being placed gently but permanently on my chest. Lily let out a small, uncertain laugh. Claire, I'm serious. Claire continued, her voice firmer now. She just doesn't fit. Every time I look at her, I feel like people are noticing, like they're wondering where I came from. My fingers tightened against the stone. She's your mother, Lily said carefully. I know that Claire snapped, then lowered her voice again. I know, but that doesn't change how it feels. What feels embarrassing? The word landed differently, sharper, more precise, like it had been waiting to be said for a long time. I only invited her because I had to, Claire added almost under her breath. If it were up to me, I wouldn't have. Something inside me gave way then. Not loudly, not in a way anyone could see, but deeply, irrevocably. Lily didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was quieter than before. That's harsh, Claire. Claire sighed, the sound heavy with something I couldn't quite name. Maybe she said, but it's true. Another silence followed. I could hear movement, fabric, shifting footsteps adjusting slightly against the gravel. I just want this life to feel real, Claire continued, and sometimes she reminds me of everything I had to leave behind to get here. Leave behind. The words echoed in my mind, pulling memories with them. The small kitchen, the late nights, the birthday cakes, the scraped knees, the whispered reassurances. Everything I had built, everything I had given, reduced to something she needed to leave behind. Lily spoke again more cautiously now. She doesn't seem like a bad person. She's not, Claire said quickly. That's not the point. Then what is the point? The point is... Claire hesitated. She makes me feel small, and I've worked too hard to not feel that way anymore. I closed my eyes, because for the first time, I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't about hate. It wasn't even about me. It was about how Claire saw herself, and the version of herself she was trying to become. And I didn't belong in that version. Not anymore. I'm not saying I don't care about her, Claire added softer now. I just need distance. After tonight, things can go back to normal. Normal. I wondered what that meant to her now, because I wasn't sure I recognized it anymore. Lily let out a quiet breath. I just think you might regret saying things like that someday. Maybe, Claire replied, but right now I just need to get through this. Through this. As if I were something to endure. Something temporary. Something inconvenient that would pass. The conversation shifted after that lighter topic, safer ground. But I didn't hear it. Not really. Because everything that mattered had already been said. I stepped back slowly, careful not to make a sound. Careful not to let them know I had been there. Because somehow, that felt important. Not for them, but for me. I didn't want to see the look on Claire's face if she realized I had heard. I didn't want to watch her try to explain it away, to soften it, to turn it into something less than what it was, because I needed to hold on to the truth, as painful as it was. I walked away from the corner of the building, my steps slow, deliberate. The music from the reception grew louder as I approached the laughter, the voices, the carefully constructed joy of it all wrapping around me again. But it felt different now. Distant, muted, like I was watching it from behind glass. I returned to my table. Table 19, the same place I had been all evening. But everything inside me had changed. I sat down quietly, folding my hands in my lap just as I had that morning. The same posture, the same stillness, but not the same person, because something had shifted. Not just my understanding of Claire, but my understanding of myself, of what I had allowed, of what I had accepted. For years I had told myself that love meant giving without expectation, that sacrifice was a form of strength, that if I just gave enough, did enough, loved enough, it would be returned. Not in the same way maybe, but in some way, in some form. But sitting there surrounded by the evidence of everything I had given, I realized something I had never allowed myself to see before. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's erasure. And I had been erasing myself for years. The music swelled. The crowd cheered. Claire and Ethan stepped onto the dance floor for their first dance. Their movements slow and synchronized, their expressions soft, connected, perfect. Everyone watched them. No one watched me. And for the first time that night, I didn't want them to, because I understood something now. Something quiet, something steady, something that didn't need to be announced or proven or seen. I wasn't invisible. I had just been looking for recognition in the wrong place. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was no longer at table 19. I was walking back toward the center of the reception, toward the lights, the music, the laughter that now felt like it belonged to a world I could finally see clearly. For years I had lived in quiet assumptions, that love meant endurance, that silence meant strength, that if I gave enough, I would eventually be seen. But Claire's words had done something no amount of time ever had. They had stripped away illusion, and in its place was clarity. I stopped just short of the main floor, my eyes drifting across the room. Victoria stood near a group of guests, her posture as poised as ever, her smile effortless as she accepted compliments about the evening. Richard nodded along beside her, glass in hand, as if everything unfolding around him had always been inevitable. Claire and Ethan were still dancing, perfect, composed, untouchable. And for a moment, I allowed myself to imagine something else, a different version of this night, one where I stepped forward, where I walked straight to the center of the room, took the microphone from the stand, and told the truth, every truth, that the wedding everyone admired, the venue, the flowers, the food, the music had been paid for by a woman they barely acknowledged, that the foundation Victoria had so proudly spoken about had nothing to do with her, that the legacy they were celebrating had been built quietly, invisibly by someone they had already decided didn't belong. I imagined the silence that would follow, the shift in the room, the way conversations would stop mid-sentence, the way eyes would turn, the way expressions would change from admiration to confusion, and then to something else, understanding, shock, maybe even shame. I imagined Claire's face, the moment the truth landed, the realization, the weight of everything she had said, everything she had done crashing into the reality of what had always been there. And for a brief, fleeting second, I wanted it. Not out of anger, not even out of revenge, but out of something simpler, a desire to be seen, to be acknowledged, to exist finally in the story that had been rewritten without me. My hand moved slightly, almost instinctively, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. The microphone. The moment. The choice. But then Claire laughed, softly, genuinely. It wasn't the polished laugh she used for guests. It was different, unfiltered, real. And it stopped me, because for all the pain I was carrying, that was still my daughter, the child I had raised, the girl who used to fall asleep with her head on my shoulder, the one who once believed I could fix anything. I stood there caught between two truths, one that demanded to be spoken, and one that asked me to let go. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with something heavier, understanding. Because the truth was, if I spoke now, I wouldn't just be exposing the Caldwells. I would be exposing Claire, stripping away the version of herself she had worked so hard to build. And maybe she deserved that. Maybe she needed it. But I couldn't be the one to do it. Not like this. Not in front of a room full of strangers. Not in a moment that was supposed to belong to her, even if she had forgotten how it belonged to me too. I lowered my hand slowly. The moment passed. Just like that. Quietly. Without anyone noticing. Without anyone knowing how close the entire evening had come to unraveling. I turned away from the center of the room. Not in defeat, not in retreat, but in something else. Something steadier. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. For years I had given everything I had to Claire. My time, my energy, my sacrifices, my silence. And tonight, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. I could stop. I didn't have to fight for a place that had already been taken from me. I didn't have to prove my worth to people who had already decided it didn't matter. And most importantly, I didn't have to stay. The realization didn't come with a rush of emotion. It came with stillness, a quiet, grounding certainty that settled into my bones. I walked back to my table one last time, not to sit, not to wait, but to gather my things. My purse rested neatly against the chair, untouched, just as I had left it. I picked it up, my movements calm, deliberate. No one looked my way. No one asked where I was going. And for the first time that night, that didn't hurt, because I understood now. Visibility isn't something you beg for. It's something you choose. And I was choosing myself. I moved through the reception, slowly weaving between tables, past conversations that didn't pause, past laughter that didn't notice me passing through it. The music continued. The celebration carried on, unchanged, untouched, as if my presence or my absence had never made a difference. Outside, the night air wrapped around me like something real, cool, unfiltered, honest. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs, letting it settle the last fragments of something that had been breaking inside me for far too long. Behind me, the sound of the wedding carried faintly through the walls, music, voices, a life continuing exactly as it was meant to. Without me. And for the first time, that felt okay. I walked toward the edge of the property where the lights grew dimmer and the world felt a little less staged. My car waited where I had left it earlier, simple, unremarkable, mine. I opened the door and sat inside, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. For a moment I didn't move. I just sat there, listening, feeling, letting the weight of everything settle into something I could finally understand. This wasn't the ending I had imagined. Not for Claire. Not for myself. But it was an ending. to something. And maybe that was enough. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating a path that stretched forward, uncertain, unfamiliar, but undeniably mine. As I drove away, the vineyard disappeared slowly in the rearview mirror. The lights, the music, the illusion, all fading into the distance. And in their place, something new began to take shape. Not clarity, not yet, but possibility. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I was finally letting go. The road out of Napa Valley stretched long and quiet beneath my headlights, the vineyards dissolving into darkness behind me. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just drove my hands steady on the wheel, my thoughts moving slower than the miles passing beneath me. For years, I had believed that leaving was something people did in anger, that it required shouting, accusations, a final explosive moment that marked the end of something important. But there was no explosion in me, only stillness. A quiet, undeniable understanding that had settled in my chest like truth finally finding its place. I didn't belong there. And more importantly, I didn't need to. I drove for nearly an hour before pulling over at a small roadside rest stop. The kind of place most people pass without noticing. A few empty parking spaces, a vending machine humming faintly under fluorescent lights, and a wooden bench facing nothing in particular. I turned off the engine and sat in silence. The absence of noise felt honest. No music, no voices, no expectations. Just me. For the first time in a very long time. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes, letting the events of the night replay not in sharp, painful flashes, but in slow, distant waves. Claire's voice, her words, the laughter inside the reception, the way no one noticed when I left. And strangely, none of it felt as heavy as I thought it would, because the weight I had been carrying for years, the need to be seen, to be appreciated, to be enough, had finally slipped away. Not because I had been given those things, but because I had stopped asking for them. When I opened my eyes again, the world looked the same, but I didn't. I reached for my phone, turning it over in my hand. There were no missed calls, no messages, no one asking where I was. I stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary before placing it back in my purse. That more than anything else told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't expected. I wasn't needed. And for the first time, I didn't feel obligated to change that. I drove the rest of the night without stopping again. By morning, I was back in Cleveland. Back to something familiar, but not the same, because even before I had left for Napa, I had already begun to let go of the life I once knew. The apartment I had moved into after selling my house felt smaller than I remembered. Quieter, too. The kind of quiet that used to feel temporary, but now felt like something else entirely. A beginning. I set my purse down on the kitchen counter and walked slowly through the space, my eyes drifting over the simple furniture, the bare walls, the absence of anything unnecessary. For years, my life had been filled with purpose. Every decision centered around Claire. Every plan shaped by what she needed, what she wanted, what would make her future better. And now, there was nothing to center myself around but me. The thought should have felt unsettling, but it didn't. It felt open. Later that morning, I sat at the small table by the window with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. I knew there were things I needed to do. Not dramatic things, not confrontational things, just necessary ones. I opened my laptop and logged into my accounts. The same accounts I had quietly used for years to support Claire tuition living expenses, the countless small contributions that had never needed recognition. And the wedding, the final invisible gift. I stared at the screen for a moment, my fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. Then one by one, I began to make changes. Automatic transfers canceled. Access permissions removed, shared accounts closed. There was no anger in my movements, no hesitation, just clarity. Each click felt like a boundary being drawn, not between me and Claire, but between who I had been and who I was becoming. When I finished, I sat back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't something anyone else would notice, but it mattered, because for the first time, I wasn't giving out of obligation. I wasn't sacrificing out of fear. I was choosing. That afternoon, my phone rang. Claire's name lit up the screen. I watched it for a moment, just a moment, before letting it go to voicemail. Not as punishment, not as revenge, but because I wasn't ready. Not to hear her voice, not to step back into a version of myself I had just walked away from. The voicemail came through a few seconds later. I didn't listen to it. Not yet. Instead, I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. People moved through their day as they always did. Cars passed. A woman walked her dog. A child rode past on a bicycle laughing. Life continued, unaware of the shift that had taken place inside me. And for once, that felt right. The next few days passed slowly, deliberately. I kept my routine simple. Morning coffee, short walks, reading, silence. I allowed myself space not to avoid the pain, but to understand it, to sit with it, to let it settle into something that didn't control me. Claire called again and again. Each time I let it ring. Each time the distance between us grew not out of bitterness but out of necessity, because before anything could be repaired, something had to change. And that something was me. On the fourth day, I finally listened to her voicemail. Her voice sounded different. Less controlled, less certain. "Mom, I noticed you left early," she said. "I was looking for you. I didn't get a chance to talk to you before everything ended." A pause. "I hope you got home safe. Call me when you can, okay?" That was all. No questions. No urgency. No understanding of what had really happened. I set the phone down slowly, because I realized something then. Claire didn't know. She didn't know what I had heard, what I had felt, what I had finally understood. And part of me wondered if she ever would. But for now, that didn't matter, because this wasn't about making her understand. Not yet. This was about something else. Something I had spent years ignoring. Learning how to live without disappearing. For the first few days after the wedding, Claire's messages remained polite, careful, almost normal. She called to ask if I had gotten home safely. She sent a short text about how beautiful everything turned out. There was even a message with a photo from the reception, her and Ethan smiling beneath the string lights, the vineyard glowing softly behind them. "Wish you could have stayed longer," she wrote. I stared at the message for a long time. Not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. There was no question, no curiosity, no sense that anything had gone wrong. As far as Claire was concerned, the night had been perfect, and for a while, that was all she needed to believe. But perfection, I've learned, has a very short lifespan when it's built on something fragile. It started about a week later. The first call didn't come from Claire. It came from an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Bishop?" A woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes." "This is Elise, the wedding coordinator." My fingers tightened slightly around the phone. "Yes, Elise. How can I help you?" There was a pause just long enough to suggest hesitation. "I apologize for contacting you directly," she said carefully. "But there seems to be some confusion regarding final vendor settlements." Confusion? I already knew what that meant. I completed all payments prior to the event, I replied. "Yes," she said quickly. "You did. Everything was processed through your account as requested." Another pause. "But the Caldwell family has recently requested copies of the final invoices, and they appear to be under the impression that certain balances are still outstanding." I closed my eyes briefly. Of course they were. Because in their version of the story, they had been the ones paying. "I see," I said calmly. "I wanted to confirm with you before responding," Elise continued. "How would you like me to proceed?" I thought about it for a moment. Not about the money. That part was already gone. But about the truth. "I'd prefer that you provide them with whatever documentation they request," I said, without modification. There was a quiet shift in her tone. "Understood." "Thank you, Elise." When I ended the call, I set the phone down slowly. The first crack had appeared, and I knew it wouldn't take long for the rest to follow. 3 days later, Claire called again. This time, I answered. "Mom." Her voice was tight, different from before. "Yes." There was a pause. Not the casual kind, the kind filled with something heavier. "I need to ask you something," she said. I waited. "Did you pay for the wedding?" The question hung between us. Simple, direct, and impossible to misunderstand. I didn't rush to answer, because this was the moment, the one I had imagined back in that ballroom standing at the edge of everything. The truth, finally stepping into the light. "Yes," I said quietly. Silence. Not brief. Not uncertain. But absolute. "I don't understand," Claire whispered. "I didn't expect you to." I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. "I just got off the phone with Ethan," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "His parents are furious. They thought everyone thought that they were covering most of it." "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, the question breaking through whatever composure she had been holding on to. I considered that, not as an accusation, but as something real. "Because you didn't want to know," I said. "That's not true," she insisted quickly. "Of course I would have wanted to know." "Would you?" I asked gently. She didn't answer. And in that silence, the truth spoke for itself. "You said you wanted it to be perfect," I continued. "I made sure it was." "That's not the point," she snapped. I let the words settle, then asked quietly, "What is the point, Claire?" Her breathing was uneven now. "The point is..." "This is insane," she said. "You sold your house, used your savings for a wedding you barely even participated in." There it was. Not concern, not gratitude, confusion, discomfort. "I made my choice," I said simply. "You shouldn't have," she replied, her voice rising. "That's not normal, Mom. That's not how this works." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. Because she was right. It wasn't how things worked. Not anymore. "I agree," I said. The line went quiet again, and for a moment I thought she might end the call. But then, Do you have any idea what this is going to do? She asked, her voice lower now, controlled but strained. Ethan's parents feel completely blindsided. They're saying it makes them look like they were pretending, like they couldn't afford it. I listened, really listened, because this was the moment where everything could have shifted, where she could have said thank you, or even, "Why would you do that for me?" But she didn't. She was worried about appearances, about what it looked like, not what it meant. "I didn't do it for them," I said. "That doesn't matter," Claire replied quickly. "This changes things. It complicates everything." "Yes," I said softly. "It does." Another silence. Then quieter now. "I just don't understand why you would do something like that without telling me." I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window, because I understood now. Fully, completely, because I thought that's what love was, I said. She didn't respond. "And I was wrong," I added. That seemed to stop her. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means I won't be doing it again." The words landed differently, not sharp, not aggressive, just final. Claire exhaled slowly. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything," I replied, and I meant it, because for the first time, I wasn't waiting, not for understanding, not for validation, not for anything. "I need some time," she said after a moment. "I understand. I'll call you later. Take care of yourself, Claire." The line went dead. I set the phone down gently, my hands resting still against the table. Outside, the world moved the same way it always had, unchanged, unaware. But inside, something had shifted again. The illusion had broken, not just for me, but for her. And now, she had to decide what to do with the truth, just like I had. The silence after that call felt different. Not empty, not uncertain, but inevitable. For days, I didn't hear from Claire. No messages, no missed calls, no careful attempts to smooth things over the way she had before. At first, I wondered if I should reach out. Old habits don't disappear overnight. There's a part of you that still wants to fix things, to soften the edges, to make sure the other person is okay, even when you're the one who's been hurt. But I didn't, because this time, it wasn't mine to fix. Whatever Claire was going through now, whatever questions were circling in her mind, whatever cracks had begun to form in the life she had so carefully built that belonged to her. And for once, I let it. A week passed, then another, and then one afternoon my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something told me this time would be different. "Mom." Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it, not polished, not controlled, just raw. "Yes, Claire." There was a pause, but not the kind that felt distant. This one felt heavy. "I need to talk to you," she said. "I'm listening." Another breath. Then I went through the documents. I said nothing. "I didn't believe it at first," she continued. "I thought maybe there had been some kind of mistake, but I kept looking and everything was there. Every invoice, every payment." Her voice faltered. "You paid for all of it?" "Yes." A long silence followed, and this time, it wasn't avoidance. It was realization. "I don't understand how I didn't see it," she whispered. "How I didn't even think to ask." I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting her words settle. "Because you weren't looking for it," I said gently. Another pause. Then softer, "I found the paperwork for your house. My chest tightened slightly. Of course she had. I didn't know you sold it, she said. You never told me. I didn't think it mattered. How could it not matter? Her voice cracked. That was your home. Our home. I closed my eyes for a moment, because hearing her say that now felt different. It mattered to me, I said quietly, but it wasn't something I wanted to burden you with. I would have wanted to know she insisted. Would you? I asked, not unkindly. The question lingered. And again. She didn't answer. Instead, she said something else. Something I hadn't expected. I keep thinking about the wedding, she murmured. About everything I said. Everything I did. My hand tightened slightly around the edge of the table. Claire. I didn't know you heard me. The words hit harder than anything else she had said. Not because of what they meant, but because of how easily she admitted it. I opened my eyes slowly. What makes you think I heard anything I asked? There was a quiet exhale on the other end. Because I remember where I was standing, she said. I remember the moment, and I keep thinking, you were out there. Somewhere. She swallowed. And I can't stop wondering if you were close enough to hear. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because this was the moment where truth mattered. Not for her, for me. Yes, I said finally. I heard you. The silence that followed wasn't just heavy, it was devastating. I could almost feel it through the phone. Claire's breathing changed shallow, uneven. You heard everything, she whispered. Yes. Another pause. Longer than any before it. I didn't mean she started then stopped herself. No, that's not true. I did mean it. Her honesty surprised me. Painful as it was, it mattered. I just didn't think you would ever hear it out loud, she continued. I didn't think it would hurt like this. A small, sad smile touched my lips. It always hurts like this, I said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Claire's voice broke. I don't know who I've been, she said. I keep replaying everything, how I treated you, how I acted, the things I said. And it's like, I don't recognize myself. That I understood. More than she knew. People change, Claire, I said. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes all at once. I don't want to be that person, she whispered. The words hung in the air. Not as a promise, but as a question. I let them sit there, because this wasn't something I could answer for her. I thought I was building something better, she continued. A better life. A better version of myself. But now it just feels like I built it on top of everything you gave me and pretended it came from somewhere else. Her voice cracked again. And I don't know how to fix that. I leaned forward slightly, my hands folding together, because this was the moment everything had been leading to. Not the wedding, not the truth about the money, but this, the realization. You don't fix it all at once, I said quietly. How then, she asked. You start by being honest, I replied. With yourself first. I'm trying, she said. I know. A pause. Then more carefully. Can I see you? The question came gently, cautiously, as if she wasn't sure she had the right to ask. I looked out the window, watching the afternoon light stretch across the street. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to close the distance, to make things easier. But another part of me, the part that had finally learned something important, held back. I'm not ready for that yet, I said. Her breath caught. I understand, she said quickly. I do. I needed to ask. And I'm glad you did. Another silence. Softer this time. Less painful. Mom, she said, hesitating. Yes, I'm sorry. The words were simple, but they carried weight, not just because of what they meant, but because of how long it had taken to say them. I let them settle, not rushing to accept them, not rejecting them, just acknowledging them. Thank you for saying that, I replied. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. The apology didn't change everything. It didn't erase what I had heard. It didn't undo years of quiet distance or the choices Claire had made without ever looking back to see who she was leaving behind. But it did something else. It opened a door, not wide, not easily, but just enough for something to pass through. And for now, that was enough. The days after our call moved slowly, but not heavily. There was a difference I couldn't quite explain at first. Before, silence between us had felt like absence. Now, it felt like space. Space to think, space to feel, space to decide what came next. Claire didn't call again right away. Instead, she sent a message 2 days later. I understand if you need time. I just want you to know I'm not running away from this. I read it twice, not because it was complicated, but because it was new. For so long, Claire had been the one creating distance, avoiding uncomfortable conversations, redirecting anything that felt too real. Now she was staying. That mattered. Even if I wasn't ready to meet her halfway yet. I didn't respond immediately, not out of hesitation, but because I was learning something I had never allowed myself before. That I didn't have to answer everything right away, that I could take time, that my feelings deserved that space. 3 days later, I replied, I hear you, and I appreciate you saying that. Nothing more, nothing less. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was honest. And for the first time in our relationship, honesty felt more important than comfort. A week passed before I heard from her again. This time it was a call. I answered. Hi, she said softly. Hi, Claire. There was a brief pause, but it didn't feel strained. I've been thinking a lot, she began. I imagined you would be. A small, almost nervous laugh came through the line. Yeah, that's putting it lightly. I leaned back in my chair, waiting. I've been trying to understand how I got here, she continued. Not just the wedding. Everything. The way I treated you. The way I started seeing things differently. I didn't interrupt. I keep going back to college, she said. When everything started to change, that didn't surprise me. It felt like I was stepping into a different world, she went on. People with money, connections, confidence. The kind of life that always seemed out of reach before. I could picture it. The environment, the pressure, the silent expectations. At first it was exciting, she admitted, but then it became something else. What do you mean? I asked gently. It felt like I had to prove I belonged there, she said. Like I had to reshape parts of myself just to fit in. I closed my eyes for a moment. Because that, I understood. And the easiest way to do that, she added quietly, was to distance myself from anything that reminded me I didn't come from that world. Her words were careful, measured, but the meaning behind them was clear. And that included me, I said. Yes, she whispered. There was no defensiveness in her voice, no attempt to soften it. Just truth. I didn't think of it like that at the time, she continued. I told myself I was just growing, evolving. But now I see what I was really doing. I waited. I was erasing parts of my life that didn't match the version of myself I wanted to present, she said, and you were part of that life. A quiet breath followed. I'm so ashamed of that. The word hung there. Ashamed. Not guilty. Not sorry. Ashamed. That carried weight. You don't need to stay in that feeling, I said gently. I know, she replied, but I think I need to understand it first. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. That's fair. There was a pause. Then she said more carefully, I've also been dealing with everything on Ethan's side. I didn't ask. I let her choose what to share. His parents aren't handling this well, she admitted. They're embarrassed. They feel like the whole situation makes them look dishonest. That's unfortunate, I said. That's one word for it, she muttered. There was a faint edge in her tone now, not directed at me, at them. They've been trying to figure out how to explain it to people, she continued, how to control the narrative. Of course they were. And Ethan? I asked. She hesitated. He's conflicted, she said. He didn't know about any of this either. He thought his parents were covering most of it. And now he's questioning everything she replied. Not just the money. The way his parents presented themselves. The way they handled things. I absorbed that quietly, because it meant something. Not just for them, but for Claire. It's messy, she added. Yes, I said. It usually is when the truth comes out. Another pause. Then softer. I don't know what my life looks like anymore, she admitted. The honesty in that statement mattered more than anything else she had said, because it meant she was no longer holding on to the illusion. You're figuring it out, I said. I hope so. Silence settled between us again, but this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt open. Mom, she said after a moment. Yes, I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I know, and I don't expect things to go back to how they were. They won't, I said gently. I understand that, she replied. I just want the chance to build something better, even if it takes time. I let her words settle, because this wasn't about promises. It was about consistency, about what came next. You'll have that chance, I said. Her breath caught slightly. Really? Yes. Not because I was ready to move forward, but because I was no longer holding on to the past in the same way. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't respond right away, because what I was about to say mattered, but it won't be the same as before. I added, I know. There will be boundaries, I said. Clear ones. I understand. And trust? I paused. Will take time. I'm willing to wait, she said. I believed her. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't asking for something easy. She was asking for something real. And that was a beginning. Claire didn't come to see me right away, and I was grateful for that. Not because I didn't want to see her, but because I needed to feel steady in myself before I faced her again. There's a difference between wanting reconciliation and being ready for it. For years, I had rushed to close every gap between us, afraid that distance meant loss. Now, I understood something different. Distance, when chosen with intention, can be a form of protection. A way to rebuild yourself before you try to rebuild anything else. 2 weeks after our last conversation, Claire called again. Mom, She said, her voice quieter than before, but more grounded. I'm in Cleveland. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not surprised, just aware. I figured you might be, I replied. I didn't come without thinking about it, she added quickly. I know you said you weren't ready, and I respect that. I just needed to be here. There was something in her tone that felt different this time. Not urgency, not panic, but intention. Where are you staying? I asked. A small hotel downtown, she said. Nothing fancy. I almost smiled at that. All right. There was a brief pause. I don't want to push you, she continued. But if you're open to it, I'd like to see you, even if it's just for a few minutes. I looked around my apartment, the simple furniture, the quiet space that had slowly started to feel like mine. A few minutes. That's all she was asking for. Not forgiveness, not resolution, just presence. Tomorrow, I said finally, there's a small cafe a few blocks from here. We can meet there. Her breath caught softly. Thank you. The next morning I arrived early. Old habits again. But this time it wasn't out of anxiety. It was out of preparation. I chose a table near the window where the light felt natural and open. Ordered a cup of coffee. Sat with my hands folded loosely in front of me, watching people pass by outside. When Claire walked in, I recognized her immediately, but not in the way I expected. She looked smaller, not physically, but in the way her confidence no longer filled the room ahead of her. Her posture was more careful now, her expression softer, her eyes searching. She spotted me quickly, and for a moment she hesitated. Then she walked over. Hi, she said. Hi, Claire. We didn't hug. Not because we couldn't, but because neither of us knew if we should. She sat down across from me, her hands resting lightly on the table, mirroring mine in a way that felt almost instinctive. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. And surprisingly, it didn't feel awkward. It felt honest. You look well, she said finally. So do you. That wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. There was something real in her face now, something unpolished, and I found that I preferred it. I wasn't sure you'd come, she admitted. I wasn't sure either, I said. A small, almost sad smile crossed her face. That's fair. The waitress came by and Claire ordered coffee. Her voice was steady, but I could see the slight tremor in her hands as she reached for the cup when it arrived. I've gone over this conversation in my head 100 times, she said once we were alone again. I imagine you have. I keep thinking I'll say the right thing, she continued. The thing that makes everything better. But I don't think that exists. No, I said gently. It doesn't. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry, she said again. Not rushed. Not desperate. Just clear. I know I've said it before, but I need you to hear it in person. I hear you, I replied. She looked at me, really looked this time. Not through me, not past me, at me. I don't expect you to forgive me right now, she added, or even soon, but I need you to know that I understand what I did. Not just the words you heard, but everything leading up to them. I waited. I spent years trying to become someone else, she said, and I convinced myself that meant leaving parts of my life behind. But the truth is, I wasn't leaving them behind. I was rejecting them. Her voice faltered slightly. I was rejecting you. The words hung between us, heavy, but necessary. Yes, I said quietly. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I don't want to be that person anymore," she said. "That's a start," I replied. She nodded, swallowing hard. "I've also been dealing with things at home," she continued. "Ethan, he's starting to see things differently too, about his parents, about the way everything was handled." "And how is that going?" I asked. "Not easily," she admitted. "There's tension, a lot of it. But for the first time, we're actually talking about things instead of pretending everything is perfect." That mattered, more than she probably realized. "I think we both bought into something that wasn't real," she added. "Yes," I said. "That happens more often than people admit." She let out a quiet breath. "I don't know what my life looks like now," she said, "but I know. I don't want it to look like that anymore." I studied her for a moment. Not the words, the intention behind them, the difference between who she had been and who she was trying to become. "Change takes time," I said. "I know, and it requires consistency." "I'm willing to do that," she replied. I believed her, but belief I had learned wasn't the same as trust. And trust had to be rebuilt. "I need to be honest with you," I said. "Please," she replied. "I'm not ready to go back to the way things were," I continued, "and I may never be." She nodded immediately. "I understand. There are things I need now that I didn't before," I said. "Boundaries, space, respect that isn't dependent on circumstances. You deserve that," she said. "Yes," I replied. "I do." The words felt different coming out of my mouth. Stronger, more certain. "And if we're going to have a relationship moving forward," I added, "it has to be built on something real. Not appearances, not expectations, not convenience." "I want that too," she said. I held her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift between us. Not back to what it had been, but forward, into something new. "I'm willing to try," I said. Her breath caught just slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. We sat there for a while after that, not talking much, not needing to, because for the first time, silence between us didn't feel like distance. It felt like space. And in that space, something fragile, something real, had finally begun. The first thing I learned after that morning at the cafe was that healing doesn't happen in a single moment. It doesn't arrive neatly tied together with apologies and understanding. It unfolds slowly, unevenly, sometimes quietly in ways you don't even notice until you look back and realize how far you've come. After that conversation, Claire didn't try to rush anything. She didn't call every day. She didn't show up unannounced. She didn't ask for more than I was ready to give. And that more than anything she had said showed me she was beginning to understand. Respect isn't something you declare, it's something you demonstrate. Weeks passed, then months. Our conversations became more regular, but they remained measured, intentional. We talked about simple things at first. Her job, my routines, the kind of everyday details that don't carry weight but slowly rebuild connection. And little by little, I began to see something in her that I hadn't seen in a long time. Humility. Not the kind that comes from being told you're wrong, but the kind that grows when you realize it yourself. One afternoon, she told me she had taken on extra work. "I want to start paying things back," she said. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. "You don't owe me anything," I replied. "I know," she said, "but I owe myself something." That answer stayed with me because it meant she wasn't trying to fix the past for me. She was trying to change her future for herself. And that mattered. Her relationship with Ethan also shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in ways that felt more honest. They're not as perfect as I thought, she admitted during one of our calls referring to his parents. They never were, I said gently. I know that now. There was no bitterness in her voice, just clarity. Ethan and I are figuring things out, she continued, without all the pressure, without trying to prove anything to anyone. And how does that feel? I asked. She paused. Scary, she said, but real. Real. That word again. It seemed to follow her now like something she was learning to hold on to instead of hide from. As for me, my life didn't return to what it had been, and I didn't want it to. The small apartment I had once thought of as temporary became something else entirely, a place of my own, a space that reflected me, not who I had been for someone else. I started doing things I had never allowed myself time for before. Reading in the afternoons without guilt, taking walks without checking the time, saying no without explaining why. It was strange at first, unfamiliar, but also freeing. For the first time in decades, my life wasn't centered around someone else's needs, and instead of feeling empty, it felt full. Claire visited again a few months later. This time it wasn't cautious. It wasn't uncertain. It was respectful. She knocked, waited, gave me space to choose. When I opened the door, she smiled, not the polished smile I had seen at the wedding, but something softer, more honest. Hi, Mom, she said. Hi, Claire. We hugged then, not tightly, not desperately, but gently, like two people who understood that closeness isn't something you force, it's something you rebuild. She came inside looking around the apartment. It's nice, she said. It's simple, I replied. It feels peaceful. I nodded. It is. We sat together, talked, shared small pieces of our lives. Nothing dramatic, nothing overwhelming, just presence. And that was enough, because this wasn't about returning to the past. It was about creating something new, something that didn't rely on sacrifice or silence, something that allowed both of us to exist fully. Before she left that day, Claire stood by the door, hesitating slightly. I know things will never be the same, she said. They won't, I agreed, but I think they might be better, she added. I studied her for a moment, not as the little girl I once knew, not as the person she had become at the wedding, but as who she was now, and who she was trying to be. Different, I said. Better, she repeated softly. I smiled just a little. Maybe. She nodded, accepting that, not pushing for more. And as she walked away, I felt something settle inside me. Not closure, not completely, but something close to it. Because the truth is, love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's distant. Sometimes it's choosing yourself after years of choosing someone else. And sometimes it's learning that letting go isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of something stronger, something healthier, something real. I paid for my daughter's wedding in silence. And I walked away in silence too. But what I found on the other side of that silence was my voice. And this time, I wasn't going to lose it again. Sometimes the deepest kind of love is the one that teaches us when to stop giving ourselves away. For years, I believed that being a good mother meant endless sacrifice. That if I just loved enough, gave enough, endured enough, everything would eventually fall into place. But love without boundaries doesn't build connection. It builds imbalance. And eventually, that imbalance breaks something, not just relationships, but the person holding everything together. What I learned is this: you can love someone deeply and still choose yourself. You can forgive. Without returning to who you used to be, you can rebuild without losing your dignity in the process. Claire didn't change overnight, and neither did I, but we both learned something that matters more than perfection. That real love isn't about appearances, it's about honesty, respect, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever given more than you received, if you've ever had to walk away just to find yourself again, you're not alone. I'd love to hear your story. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done in my place? If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes sharing our truth is how we help someone else find theirs.